Mm. 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 Mm.
Right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Daubney. I'm going to chair the meeting this evening of Children Education Communities Policy and Scrutiny Committee. Today's date for the record is Wednesday, 13th of April, 2022. It's just after 5:30, and I propose to take a break around 7 o'clock for 5 minutes or so. Otherwise, we'll just work our way straight through the agenda. Welcome to everyone we can see around the table, to our guests, and also those joining us by Zoom, some of whom are council officers who are unwell and therefore not able to attend the meeting in person, but they have very bravely agreed to join us by Zoom, and we're very glad and thankful to them for doing so. I have apologies from Councillor Baker and Councillor Barker. Councillor Barker is substituted this evening by Councillor Wardby. Thank you very much, Councillor Wardby, for joining us. First item is declarations of interest. Do I have any from members? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. It's worth saying, as it's mentioned in the agenda, item 7, Archbishop Holgate School. It's where I work. So
thank you very much. Any others, anyone? Right. Next item is the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of January 2022. Any comments on the minutes from people? No. Okay, well, those are agreed then, approved. Thank you very much. Now, public participation. We have Ms. Flick Williams coming to join us via Zoom, talk about access for disabled people. Ms. Williams, are you there?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. Nice to have you join us. We'd like to just get my phone restarted. I very probably turned the phone off at the beginning of the meeting, which means that, of course, I don't have the timer. So I just, my colleague is going to help me with that. Thank you very much, Jane. So 3 minutes. Right. Do you want to start now, Ms. Williams?
I begin with the quotation I ended my speech to climate change scrutiny yesterday. Inclusion has come to mean almost everything but the elimination of exclusion. Every event you hold within the foot streets underlines the exclusion of blue badge holders who have no other means of accessing the city centre. The blue badge ban is the elephant in the room when you talk about inclusive events. They are just not when such a large cohort of disabled people are excluded by this council's own discriminatory policy. As you may have noticed on Twitter, disabled people respond to your publicity for events such as the Residents Festival, the Ice Sculpture Trail, and the York Life Festival, with how they are being left out and left behind because they cannot access them. There is a pernicious cruelty in waiving offers in front of people who are prevented from taking them up by a policy that excludes them. And as for York's national and international profile, look no further than the vice chair of this committee who can enlighten you further on that. You write that the culture strategy has inclusion and participation at its core, that it will make culture accessible to everybody in York. Just words. The My City Centre draft vision talks about utilising underused upper floor spaces. Really? How much of that has lift provision? because without it, it isn't accessible. Those of us who aren't ambulant are still smarting from the £5 million spent on Clifford's Tower by English Heritage, who don't include us in their cultural vision. Purple flag status is a particular source of irritation. It takes the colour of the disability rights movement and declares the city a safe place. Well, not for me, it's not. Now prevented from using my blue badge to take a taxi to the door of the venue I wish to frequent. So please stop saying all when what you actually mean is most. The recent live music event held in Parliament Street was unable to provide access information to numerous people who asked multiple times in advance. Nothing can be spontaneous for us. We must plan meticulously beforehand to have any chance of participation. And finally, where in this report is the commitment to digital accessibility? The promise to use all tools available to make your content accessible to those who use adaptive technology? I don't see it. Sadly, your cultural strategy, as presented here, is a very long way off being the inclusive vision you believe it to be.
That's the 3 minutes now, Ms. Williams. Thank you very much. Your comments will be recorded and taken into account when these matters are discussed. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Yes, Mr. Webb.
Chair, may I address Ms Williams' comments, as she did mention the Vice Chair of the committee, which, as some of you will know, is me. She's referring to an incident that happened when I took a weekend away, which was my first mistake, to Northumbria. And not there's anything wrong with Northumbria. And when I was up there, I was speaking to a gentleman about where I came from. I said I come from York. And he said, oh, lovely place to visit, but we would not be able to do that now due to the exclusivity, the stopping of people who are disabled from entering the city. And I made a point of highlighting this because I do think that a lot of what Miss Williams has said is on the nose, really, and it's something that I hope that we can look at this evening. But I thought I'd address that here and now, A, before I forgot, and B, because she'd mentioned it in her speech. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Webb. Right, item 4 on the agenda now is the cultural strategy update from Nikki York. Joining us tonight, we have Sarah Loftus, Bethan Gibreed, and Helen Napsey is joining us, I believe, via Zoom. Is Helen there?
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Right, thank you.
Chair, could I just ask something? I'm not sure that Sarah, I'm sorry, the second, would necessarily know who we all are. Could we just kind of introduce ourselves?
Right, yes, by all means.
Because it's Sarah's relatively new, aren't you?
By all means. David, do you want to start?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm David Heaton, Councillor for Holgate.
And I'm Fiona Fitzpatrick, Councillor for Guildhall City Centre Ward.
Thanks. I am Bob Webb, Councillor for Heworth and Shadow Executive Member for Children and Young People and Vice Chair of this committee.
Thank you, Bob. Councillor Simon Daubney, Councillor for Westfield, obviously Chair of the committee.
Councillor Sam Wardby for Rawcliffe and Clifton Without.
And Councillor Stephen Fenton from Dringhouses and Woodthorpe.
Right, thank you all. Right, Sarah, would you like to start, or Bethan? I don't know who's leading this tonight.
I was just going to put on the strategic.
Sorry, if you'd like to press the microphone.
Sorry,
button.
can you hear me now?
That's
Yeah. I wasn't planning on going through the report page by page, but I just wanted to kind of set a scene around what Make It York's responsibilities are around the cultural agenda. You'll have seen that we have published our first business plan as a very external document that sets out our key priorities, and culture is one of those key priorities. And we see ourselves as the custodian of the culture strategy. We do not have the funds to implement every single element of the strategy, but we're there to help to develop and support and look at ways at how we can implement the strategy. As part of our SLA with the local authority, you have gifted us that responsibility to ensure that the cultural strategy is delivered. But we don't have a huge pot of money to actually be able to implement or give grants out, etc., to actually develop it. So part of our business plan going forward is to look at how we can create funding and create opportunities to have resources to deliver some of the elements within the cultural strategy. So it's very much a partnership approach, working with different organisations so that we can deliver the strategy. And I think, as you can see throughout the update, there's a huge amount of activity that has been taken place across York over the past couple of years to help start implementing the strategy. And our forward plan also is very clear about the things that we need to do to really highlight culture in the city. So Bethan is one of the two members of staff, Helen and Bethan, who deliver on the cultural agenda. So they do all the hard work for us, which you can see is a huge amount of activity for two people to deliver, along with other members of the team. So I was expecting people to maybe ask us some questions, and we can answer the questions that you've got probably prepared that you want to know more about what we do.
Right, thank you very much. Right, members of the committee, would someone like to, right? I saw Councillor Webb first of all.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Sarah. Good to see you. I did meet you briefly a while back, but good to see you again. And since it's on the agenda, and I want to make mention to it, I don't think this has got really anything specific to do with you, but York Museums Trust, the curator battle on Twitter, I have to say, when that was going on through lockdown, that was a brilliant thing and something to look forward to. And I'm really, really glad that it's been mentioned here, but that was just a sort of an aside. We haven't, as part of this committee, actually spoken to anyone from the sort of cultural communities offer for this committee for quite a while. And something that I raised probably the last time we did speak to someone from the sector was about how a lot of the events that we deliver will actually link with York communities. I understand that, you know, incidentally people from York might access events, but what are we specifically doing to target, for example, you know, my residents in Tang Hall or Stephen's residents over in Dringhouses? How are we focusing to get the most for those people in our city? And then my other question would go back to Miss Williams' earlier comments. Make It York obviously is working at arm's length from the council, and currently the Liberal Democrat and Green administration have got this policy of excluding disabled residents from the city centre. And have you had any backlash over that? Have you seen any issues with that? Do you anticipate any concerns around that, or what do you think needs to happen? Thank you.
Okay, one of the key issues since I've arrived is that people say that our events aren't open to residents. So in our business plan, one of the key things that we want to do is make sure that all our events, residents feel that they can come and enjoy and participate. So the whole emphasis of our business plan is, how do we do that? How do we connect with local residents to make, you know, them enjoy the events, and they're not just there for visitors, because they're not. The Ice Trail is a really good example of that, that it's a family event, you know, it encourages everybody to participate in the city. We know that we gave out at least 15,000 leaflets to people who participated, and we know that there were a lot of residents that came to that event, and we want that mirrored in everything that we do. So we're really looking at our marketing strategy and how we get messages across, because I don't think we've done it very well in the past, that the marketing has been more about, you know, the Visit York and the external rather than the internal. How do we work with yourselves, for example, for newsletters and publications, that we get the message out that these things are happening and we want people to enjoy them. So it is high on our agenda, and any suggestions that people have that will help us engage more, we'd really like you know, to have that discussion. We are looking at doing another trail. We have thought about how we can put that trail in different communities, how we can work with schools to be part of it. You know, how do we actually get more engagement so that we can involve everybody in the things that we do. So we're really open to suggestions and to try things so that residents do come to our events, because we want them to. The key thing in lockdown was that local businesses need local people, and therefore we should be encouraging people to come in and enjoy the things that we put on for everybody.
If I could just add to that as well. So the culture strategy, that covers the events that Make It York delivers, but the culture strategy is really about the entire sector. And what we've seen during the pandemic and now moving post-pandemic is that the sector are more and more engaged with communities. They're going out into communities and delivering activities there, rather than expecting that everyone will come into the city centre to access. That's been a really significant shift that's happened in York and across the country, and we're encouraging that. But the other thing that's really key when understanding culture is that events is an aspect of culture. Most of our organisations across the city are delivering long-term programmes that include resident engagement, that might not be going to one show or going to one event, but actually about long-term culture and well-being activities that make a real difference to their lives. So events is only one aspect of the picture of cultural engagement across York.
Thank you, Beth. And I think that's really key, and that's actually a very good point. And I just, would strongly encourage anything that we can do. I know pre-pandemic we were talking about this, getting theatres going out to communities, and that was really, really powerful. Just on my other question about disability access, how do you see that affecting the cultural sector in York, or how do you see the negative advertising, for want of a better word, the negative press affecting what's going on?
I think hearing the member earlier, the resident earlier, it's highlighted to me that we need to do better. I actually quite like the idea of digital access and how we can actually use more digital technology to encourage engagement. And again, taking events out, like Bethan has talked about, and different activities that the cultural sector all cover. That's part of delivering the culture strategy. So for me, it is constant engagement and looking at how we can do things differently and learning from people and seeing what we can do, and we'll try things. And if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. So I think that dialogue is really, really important.
Thank you.
Could I just come back on that? And whilst we should always try and do things differently and you know, improve inclusion in lots of different ways, the city centre has been closed off to some residents, and that's not something that you can fix at all, but I think it's just worth saying, and you don't need to respond to this, but it's something that needs saying, that this will exclude some residents from any events that we hold in the city centre. And I think it is an elephant in the room, as Miss Williams said. And I think it's something that we should consider, and I hope you will be putting pressure, like in opposition, we're putting pressure on the administration to try and change this, but I don't expect you to come back on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Councillor Walkley. Sorry, Councillor.
It was a follow-up. I wasn't jumping in. And it's a really quick, it was just, have you approached parish councils, because they've got notice boards and they have newsletters goes out? I didn't know if it's something you've thought of. It's just that you asked us a suggestion.
No, we haven't, and I should have done, because many years ago I worked in a local authority. We had area committees, area forums, and yes, that's a really, a good suggestion for us to do. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzpatrick, your turn.
Absolutely, that's okay. I'll keep it supplementary. Following on from the inclusion kind of questions that Councillor Webb is asking, I'm pleased to see on page 11 at the top there, you talk about connections are now being established and built with organisations tackling racism in York, including Speak Up Diversity. We're great champions of the work of Speak Up Diversity, and have you started any conversations with them yet, or is that just intended to happen soon? Or have you got any ideas how that might be incorporated into any events that you might offer as yet? 11. Oh, sorry. Okay. It says connections are now being established and built with organisations tackling racism in York and diversity specialists, including Speak Up Diversity. So I'm saying that's a good thing.
I think Becca knows the details, so if I let Becca take that question, and Helen probably wants to come in as well, because they're working, on the ground.
And there's a second, can I ask a second bit then that you might want to address as well? So in line with that and the work you're doing to talk to people like that, and to also with disability groups, are Make It York signed up to the City of York's equalities policy, or do you have your own equalities policy?
We have our own equalities policy. It's probably based on the council's equality. Oh, sorry. We do have our own, but it's probably based, or has been based, on the local authority's equality policy, because we tend to try and mirror what the local authority does in our organisation, as you're our major shareholder.
Yeah, so that's all aspects of your work would be covered by the equalities policy of the council. Good. Well, I'm looking forward to our walkabout next week. We're having Sarah as well, which is good in the Shambles Market. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions around the committee table?
Bethany was going to answer.
Yes, if I just for the first part of your question. So we are in contact with Speak Up Diversity. We initially made contact last autumn with them, and because of that relationship, we're able to advocate to the sector to support their bid to make York an anti-racist and inclusive city, which many of the cultural organisations across the city publicly supported, and we did as well as chairs of the then CLG, the Culture Leaders Group. We'd like to work more with them as well going forward as well, but it's a slow process kind of establishing that relationship. We have with one of the future trails that we're looking at, we have also had relationship building with the Racial Equalities Network, and they've provided a letter of support to that scheme as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm conscious I have Helen Upsey on Zoom. Helen, have you anything to add to your colleagues' comments?
Oh, thank you very much for that. Just to add on to what Bethan was saying, it's building these relationships with Speak Up Diversity, and more broadly, it's a developing piece of work. I mean, as Sarah said, we're a team of two, so we're juggling a lot of priorities, but one of the key things that we want to do, and that we have already started implementing as part of the delivery of the culture strategy, is setting up different working groups for the different areas of the strategy. So we want to take one forward around engagement and participation and relevance, working with representative groups from different areas of the city. So that's something that we need to take forward at the moment, but as we're building relationships, we're keen that that is something that we will do. And just whilst I've got the opportunity as well to touch upon the previous comment about digital inclusion, we do work closely with Explore Libraries and Archives on this, and sit on their 100% digital group as part of our work on the culture strategy. So that is something that we're also committed to, as we know digital inclusion can be a barrier for some residents within the city.
Thanks, thank you, Helen. Any other questions from any of us? Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah and Bethan. I was interested in under the governance section, the section on the culture forum, which seemed quite an interesting idea of having a kind of an open access group from which representatives are elected onto the the executive. I just wondered how that was working and whether it might provide I suppose a template for sort of the democratization of other aspects of both within the council and within the wider sort of public sector. So it'd be interesting to hear how that's going. And then second question on the the grey boxes in the appendix, the SLA priorities under city centre vibrancy. The first bullet talks about making proposals for new ideas for commercial exploitation of a number of locations, one of which is the Knavesmire, which is big open space, which does host lots of events, not always without controversy or complaint. So I suppose it's a sort of broader request for more proactive engagement with, well, we don't have a parish council, but where there are sort of parishes and you're involved in events, but with ward councillors, with community groups that are active in those areas. I suppose to involve residents in those events in a more meaningful way, and for it to feel less as though events are being put on in kind of in isolation from the community, but saying, you know, we want the residents to actually enjoy these events, because most residents, they understand that there will be a degree of kind of nuisance factor, but usually the benefits outweigh the costs. But sometimes it's a slightly more finely balanced argument. So it's really just a plea to engage with and involve elected members and others in making those events as successful and as inclusive as possible.
Well, I will hand over to Bethan and Helen around the Culture Forum because they've worked really hard on this, and it's absolutely amazing that I think there's 94 members, am I right? Oh, 144 now, members of the Cultural Forum. So they've really engaged with the sector, which is absolutely brilliant news. And they've created a very open and transparent process for people to be elected, which is going through at the moment. So I'll hand over to both Bethan and Helen so they can talk you through that process, because it's absolutely fantastic and they've done a brilliant job and really engaged people. So we really are looking forward to the new executive that's appointed and the work that they can do in the way that we've developed this.
I think I'll pass over to Helen first for first comments.
Thanks, Bethan, and thank you, Sarah, for your comments on it as well. It's developing the Culture Forum and the Culture Exec has been something that both within Make It York and within the culture sector, there's been a lot of passion around doing. The Cultural Leaders Group, fantastic, and got us to this point with the strategy and got it to the point of launching the strategy, and they themselves identified we want to become a more open organisation that more people from across the culture, heritage and creative sector can join. So at the point of launching the strategy, which we did in December 2020, we identified that one of the key priority outcomes that we wanted to start implementing immediately was broader, more open culture forum that was open to far more people in the sector to join. The Cultural Leaders Group had been culture and heritage organisations and with some freelancers. One thing we're aware of is around 50% of people across the culture sector are actually freelancers or creative freelancers. So we want to see far more representation from them within the culture forum as well. So it's been a long process to get it to this point. But as Bethan now says, we've got 144 members. Those are people who are working across the culture and heritage sector and the creative industries within York. We meet now on a bi-monthly basis. So we had our first ever meeting of the Culture Forum in January. We did that one on Zoom so it could be more accessible. The next one we did at the end of March at York St John's Creative Centre. So people who wanted to could come and get to know one another face to face. And we're going to continue with that alternating format as different people and different groups of people have told us that that's the way that it works best for them, so they can dip in. If they can't come to the city centre, they can go to a Zoom meeting. So that's something that we're testing the water with and developing as we go, but it seems to be the best way forward with it thus far. The election process to the culture exec, now that we've had the forum open since January, members are getting to know one another, as it's such a new group because we've had a huge influx of new members. The cultural leaders group itself was around 40 members, so it's over 100 people have now joined. So we wanted to give everyone a chance to get to know one another first. But we'll hold an extraordinary meeting in May, at the start of May, when we'll start opening up the election process. I'll pass to Bethan in a second to talk a little more about the detail of that. But just to say that anyone who's a member of the Culture Forum can put themselves forward to election for one of the different posts for the culture exec. And most of these posts will be elected to. So we've got different heads of priority areas, which are reflected in the different 6 key priorities in the culture strategy. And we've also got a couple of general members who will be part of the exec, but don't have a specific head of priority area role. They'll just kind of have general input and oversight into the culture strategy. And that exec will then lead the future direction of the strategy, having been appointed by the Culture Forum and voted in by them and being members of the forum themselves to then do that. So I'll hand over to Bethan, who has a bit more detail on the timelines we're looking for at that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. So absolutely. So we'll, as Helen explained, we're having an extraordinary meeting next month. The nominations will open in the beginning of July for a September election with the new executive group in post by October. And then from October the following year, they'll run on 2-year terms. I think what's really key to pick up on it is that the reason why it was designed like this is because the sector asked for it very, very strongly in all the consultations that were done for the strategy back in 2018 and 19. It was clear that it's something that the city really wants, that sector really wants a transparent and democratically elected voice to advocate for it. So that's why we've done it that way. When we speak to other culture consortia across the UK, they kind of go, this is nuts. no one's doing it like this. But we feel it's really important to honour the wishes of the sector. So yes, we will, I'm sure, keep you informed about how it goes as the journey continues to electing this group.
Thank you very much. Councillor Foot.
I mean, that all sounds great, Bethan and Helen here as well. Just want to be clear that included in all of this, we had a motion about a year ago, 18 months ago, maybe, I can't remember, about music venues in the city. Maybe I've just missed that bit, but they will be included in this, will they? To, like, for example, the Crescents.
Yes, so the York Music Venues Network are very actively included in the forum, and they sit on some of the working groups as well. But we worked with them recently on the York Life Festival, and we partnered with them to produce that free festival that happened in the city a couple of weeks ago.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Beth and Helen and Sarah. It sounds like giving yourself a hell of a lot to do in the next few months, but it sounds really, really exciting. I've just got something specific on York's national and international profile. The last two bullet points, one is about planning for York Trailblazers. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what that is, because it says celebrating the anniversaries of past innovators and inspiring those of today and the future. I think it sounds quite interesting. And then the final bullet point in that section says, a culture addition to the CYC International Prospectus written and submitted with a strong focus on international cultural industries and media arts. I didn't even know we had an international prospectus. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what that is and what's you're involved with. Thank you.
Well, I think Bethan's the best person to talk about the Trailblazers, because Bethan's written the application and pulled all the information together. And Helen's probably the best one to talk about the other one. So I'll pass over to those two.
Shall I go first? So yes, so actually that application is still pending, so I can't give you lots of detail about the project, but as it says in there, that it's in partnership with York Civic Trust and quite a large number of organisations across the city who have major anniversaries in the next kind of 2 to 3 years. So that's the kind of jumping off point, was about celebrating the quite extraordinary heritage and past that we have in the city of people that have done very surprising things in very surprising ways. So things that we now take for granted because they're part of how society functions, but particularly around scientific innovation in the city and the museums legacy that's there. So we wanted to take that as the jumping off point to do something that's very engaging across the entire city, that will bring a high level of resident engagement in to think about not just our extraordinary past, but our extraordinary future, where we want to blaze trails going forward. And we hope to do that around a public arts event that will happen across the city. As Sarah's alluded to, we will use lots of different kinds of community groups. Schools have been invited into that process in order to design and identify the things about the city that we really want to celebrate, and that will be something that will be installed in the city across that period.
Thank you. Helen, do you have anything to add to those comments?
No, I think that was very, very comprehensive from Bethan. I think the only thing to add, just to reiterate, that it's a project that we're looking to do a high amount of community engagement beyond the city centre, across the different areas and wards of York for. So it's something we can't say too much about, but we're keeping everything's crossed for our bid application at the moment, and hope to be able to share more news soon.
Right, thank you. I have one question to ask myself, and that is around retailing. There was a time in my professional background where selling York as a retail space was a fairly easy ask. And in fact, there's a waiting list for companies to move into the city. I'm conscious that nowadays some of this work is undertaken by the bid. Of course, Andrew Lowson isn't here to talk to us about that today. I'm sure we'll see him another time in the coming year. But can you tell me something about your vision of the city in terms of retailing, and how you might fill some of those empty units in, say, Coney Street or other parts of the city which are, I won't say, I don't like to say blighting the city centre, but obviously have they leave something lacking which we used to enjoy.
That's right. That's more of a bid activity in terms of getting the retail spaces filled. We can work very closely on the marketing of those spaces and working with people to look at how we might use those spaces in the future. From my previous areas of work where I've worked before, I was director of regeneration, so it was very close to my heart to get retail empty buildings full for the city centre. And we worked very closely with owners of the building to look at how we could look at grants to entice people to take them on and do something slightly different. We worked with cultural groups so that they could use them and have a kind of rent-free period as well through using different grants. We looked at shopfront schemes. We worked with Heritage to look at how, if some of the buildings weren't accessible, we could look at how we could change those to make them more accessible to do different uses in. So there's a whole range of things that we can do with the bid, but Make It York's responsibility will really be to able to market that once we have a clear strategy of what we want to do in those empty spaces.
Right, thank you very much. Any other questions, colleagues? David?
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was just a quick comment, really. Good to hear the comments on the scientific cultural aspect, because it's very easy in these situations to think of culture as visual art, music, theatre, those sorts of things. But particularly in York, we've got a very rich industrial heritage as well, and industrial culture that goes with it when you look across the city. So it's very good that we could be looking in those sorts of directions as well, and making sure that we represent, you know, everything that's been a core part of this, particularly as, you know, we're looking at Great British Rail and things like that, and other factors. So thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
I didn't answer one question, I don't think, which was about the Knavesmire and Tower Gardens and the Eye of York and other spaces. I've inherited a number of things that happened in those spaces, so I'm aware of some of the issues that activity might have brought to the forefront. So we are currently looking at those spaces and looking at a plan for how we use those. So very much would like to engage with you about that. We're talking, as you know, Charlie is our lead officer within the City Council, and we are looking at how much time we spend on looking at those areas, what they can be used for, what's the appropriate use. So everything's open at the moment. We have some inherited events that we will deliver, because we have to deliver those because we've given our word. But in the future, we really want to work and say, what's the best use of these spaces and what should we be doing? So really, again, open to have that conversation with you and relevant people to really look at how we use those spaces effectively for the city.
Right, thank you both, Sarah and Bethan, and thank you, Helen, for joining us remotely. Thank you for the report and for coming to join us this afternoon. Thank you again. I'll now move on to agenda item 5. I know we have Richard with us in person. We have Anne Coyle via Zoom and Maxine Squire also on Zoom. So, Richard, please have a seat.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased you said we had some colleagues on the line, which will be certainly helpful to me. Some of the questions that I'm likely to ask on this.
Should we just check they're there? Anne, you there?
Oh, apologies, couldn't find my mute button. Yes, hello, Richard. You're not on your own. Hello, colleagues.
Hi, thank you. Nice to hear you.
And is Maxine there with us?
I am, yes. Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Thank you both.
Okay, so
right, Richard, all yours.
I'll do an introduction then. Okay, so this is your third quarter monitor for the budgets that come within the remit of the committee. So the majority of these are within the People Directorate and the children's element of it, but there are some within the community side as well that come within the committee's remit. As usual, this is a subset of the information that's already been considered by the executive when they looked at the full council monitor in February. And table 1 on page 23 summarises the financial position and the projections at quarter 3, and that's showing a projected overspend on these budgets of about 7.2 million for the year, and that is an increase of about 300,000, just under 300,000 from the Q2 position that I came to talk to you about in January. As you can probably imagine, the major pressures at Q3 are very similar, almost entirely consistent with those that we were reporting at Q2. So the significant overspend within children's social care, and that driven by the number of children and young people in care at that point in time and projected for the rest of the year. I think I've mentioned to colleagues previously that the base budget for 21-22 has been, and for previous years, was designed around a number of children and young people in care of about 200, in the range about 190 to 210. And I think at Q3, we had, at that point in time, I think about 274 children and young people in care. And that's clearly driving the pressures within children's social care in terms of the placement costs of managing those children and young people, and also within the staffing as well. That's a significant driver in terms of those staffing pressures. So other pressures, not of the same scale, but still obviously significant, are within home to school transport, and where we've got some expenditure pressures. And then also within the, the high needs element of the dedicated schools grant, where we've been seeing significant additional costs over the last few years. And again, we've discussed this regularly at this meeting, and the need to deal with that deficit on the DSG. The report mentions that we've been in discussions over the last 6 months with colleagues at the Department for Education around developing our financial recovery plan. At the time we wrote this report, we were still in those discussions at Q3, but we've now concluded those discussions and entered into a formal agreement with the DfE, and that has meant that they have provisionally agreed to release an additional £17.1 million of dedicated schools resource over the next 4 years, which is extremely welcome position. That's clearly subject to the local authority for the council managing pressures themselves. So I think we were projecting a deficit of about 35 million over that period on the DSG. The DfE will contribute round about half of that to us, and then we have plans in place within that recovery process to manage the rest of those pressures locally. If we do that and keep to that plan, then the DfE will transfer those resources across to us over the next 4 years, and have already transferred, I think, 7.6 million at the end of March to the local authority, which helps the 21-2 position on the DSG over and above what's in this paper. That doesn't change that 7.2 million because that's the general fund figure, but within the DSG, that's extremely helpful in terms of bringing that cumulative deficit down a bit before the end of this financial year. So I'll stop there and open it up for questions and comments.
Right, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Fenton.
Thanks, Chair. It may be more one for Maxine and Anne. Paragraph 17, page 26, talks about homeschool transport budget, which I think ever since I've been on this committee has been in a challenged state. There's reference to reducing the costs of SEND homeschool transport is a work stream in the safety valve plan agreed with DfE. I just wondered if officers could explain what the safety valve plan is, because I don't think this one I've come across in previous reports. It'd be useful to find out what that is and how it will assist our efforts to reduce costs in that area.
So, Richard, do you want me to reply? Councillor Fenton, it's Maxine. The safety valve is the agreement with the Department for Education, which Richard has mentioned. So we identified some areas that we were going to target for bringing our dedicated schools grant back into balance in the high needs element of it. And we'd already identified that we got pressures in home to school transport, which we have been working on to mitigate, as you've said, for a number of years. So the 17.1 million, which Richard has referenced, that is the safety valve agreement. And it's the delivery of actions that have been identified, including one around SEND transport, which is part of that safety valve agreement.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzpatrick, I think. Yes, by all means.
Thank you, Chair. Just supplementary on that previous question. Firstly, thank you, Richard and Maxine, for your work on this negotiation with the Department for Education. I can't imagine anything more depressing, but I'm sure it was well fought. In paragraph 17, where we talk about home to school transport, that's one aspect, and Maxine's quite right saying it's something that she's been looking at, and it was indeed in the budget this year to look at removing 150,000 from that home school transport budget for children with special needs. But I'll come back to the fact that it is slightly concerning. Now, I understand why we have had to take the money, because, you know, due to austerity, due to lack of funding from national government, the deficit has grown and grown. And therefore, we're in a position where some money has been offered if we essentially agree to make a lot of cuts over time. And one of those is homeschool transport. And I suppose for me, my worry is how do we guarantee that we're not going to get into a situation where families and children with special educational needs are struggling to access school, really? I mean, the Education Act refers to the fact that children should arrive essentially ready and able and willing at school. And if they had got a bus, or they would likely have previously got some sort of taxi, and now they're having to get a bus, then that's going to fluster someone, isn't it? And I just wonder what we're doing to mitigate against the worst of these cuts.
Thank you, Councillor Webb, and obviously, you know, sort of everybody shares those concerns. But what I would say is that we are looking very, very carefully at our eligibility criteria around the provision of school transport. One of the things that we're very, very keen to do is promote independent travel, because we do feel that that's a key life skill for children and young people to develop. And where it is appropriate for us to be working with children and their families on supporting independent travel, and we do have our York Independent Travel Training Service. That's going to be part of the assessment that we use when we're looking at the eligibility for home to school transport. So what I would stress is that we're not going to be taking transport away from people. We're going to make sure that we are appropriately assessing their transport needs, and that we are putting in the right transport solutions for them based on that assessment of need. It's really important that we're helping to prepare children and young people at the earliest stages in their lives for being included in York, which is a city that's got good transport connectivity, how they can use more green and more sustainable forms of transport, because that will help to support them into adult life. So this is part of the work that we are doing through working with parents and carers at the earliest stages to look at what are the alternatives. It's not about denying people the chance to get to school or get to their colleges. It's just looking at, have we got the most appropriate method of transport in place?
Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Anne and Maxine, really, possibly Anne. Out county always interests me, or out of city placements, and I can see it explained fairly clearly there. And certainly the Annex 1 is very much appreciated there with numbers. Do we want to say anything more about that? Or obviously COVID has had some effects, but we're looking at numbers that are coming out, you know, as they reach an appropriate age, might move away from external placements. Is there anything you want to add to Annex 1 or say about Annex 1 other than what we've got there? Maybe.
One of the things in terms of our SEN use of outer city placements, Fiona, is that the reason why we did our inclusion review was to really pinpoint where our gaps were in terms of in-city sufficiency. And that's something that we've now identified is related to complex autism, where there's also a presenting need of SEMH. And that's something now that we are looking at in terms of, well, what does the provision now need to look like as part of our graduated response to ensure that we've got something which meets that need appropriately in city. And that's going to be part of our future capital plans, and will help to reduce that pressure that we've been seeing building over time, so that children and young people with particular areas of primary need can be educated in city rather than having to access out of city provision.
Thank you, Maxine.
Yeah, but the only thing I would add into that, Fiona, is I think we'll cover it a little bit more when we talk about the children in care paper around some of the transformation, what we're about to do around trying to find good sufficiency in terms of children in our care, and actually some of the support we want from fostering offer around, being parents of children that actually, take their children to school in the same kind of way that any other children are, and assisted that way. And obviously we want a sufficiency strategy that brings our children closer. And I should say, colleagues, that we also have Jamila Hussain on Zoom too, and Jamila's been a real driver behind the safety valve work that was done, and has led a lot on some of the schools transport stuff too. So I just don't want to for her not to have some credit for all of the work that's been behind this. But we'll cover it a bit more, Fiona, when we talk about the children care paper, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Gus Eaton.
Thanks. Just a couple of brief ones from me. Point 6, we're talking about the number of children and young people in care. At that point 274, what are the current projections at the moment?
For the number of children in care, is that your question?
That's it, yes.
I mean, it's really, our aim is to reduce the number of children that we have in care and have the right children in our care. It is a demand-led service, and the aim for us is to really look at making sure that we've got a targeted early help offer that intervenes with families and prevents our children coming into care. It's really difficult to say to you, we project another 10 or 15 children coming into care, because our aim is a reduction of children in care through having the right children in care, because we are front-loading families with the right support that manages that safe uncertainty that results often in children coming into care in a crisis.
And in terms of those who would be moving out of care in the next 6 months, 12 months, what are we looking at with that?
Sure. Julie, you're on the screen, and I wonder if you want to come in and just give members a kind of view of where we're at with our plans around our children who are leaving care.
Hi everyone, good evening. So in terms of our young people who are turning 18, we have, in the next 3 to 6 months, we probably have about 14 or 15 young people who will turn 18, so leave the care system and move into our leaving care service. Our pathway team will be supported through that service until they're 25, but clearly we won't be accommodating those young people. We are looking at young people who we can rehabilitate home. So in terms of the children who are currently in the corporate parenting service, we're working very closely with them and their parents to get them home safely, because clearly we would only want children to go home safely. I would say there are about 25 young children in that particular area that we're working with and working with their families. So that brings us to about 40 children and young people in the next, I would say, 3 to 6 months that we're looking at. clearly we can't make, I can't make assurances around the children that are going home, because as we know, families change. But that would be the number that we're looking at over the next 3 to 6 months.
Thank you. So we're looking at some reduction, but we're not looking at something that would lead us back to the position of the 200 that we're budgeting for then.
No,
Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say that I think, you know, the world has changed for children over time, and that, you know, York has worked on a predicated on a number of 200 children for a very long time, is my understanding. But we know so much more about some of the trials and tribulations that have happened to children over the last 10 years, and particularly their rise in addiction of drug and alcohol for adults, parents and carers. And we've got a lot of work to do, both locally, regionally and nationally, to be able to front load the support that reduces harm and prevents our children coming into care. I would suggest to you that I think it would be overly ambitious for York to be predicting 200 children in care over the next 12 to 18 months. That's not to say that we can't significantly reduce our numbers of children coming into care for the right reasons, but 200 children is a low figure for the kind of complex needs that we see in today's children's social care.
It sounds like a lot of that will be, of course, long term. What would your thoughts then be on what we should be budgeting for in that case if 200 is too low at the moment?
I mean, it's a great question. It's a really great challenge question. I think we as a nation are still coming out of the pandemic, and I think we're still seeing the impact of significant mental health and disruption in families. And I guess I would want to answer that question a bit more thoughtfully in about 6 months' time, when I think we've got through the latter part of this year, and where we know things like vaccines on children are going to prevent a kind of resurgence of pandemic. So my own view is I think that we should be budgeting for around 250 to 270 children. And that gives us some kind of sense of flex over the next 18 months to have a 3-year strategy about that. So much of this depends on the complexities of family life, the grip of our refreshed early help approach to reducing need and harm in the community. And that's the way that you reduce children coming into care over a longer period of time.
Thank you. And I think we can all agree we're hoping that we're going to be in more normal times in about 6 months' time. I'll step aside and I'll come back with another question later if we've more time, if that's all right.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you, and thank you for everybody who's on Zoom tonight. I'm not sure how many of you there are, but thank you, Jamila. If I missed you out earlier on, I didn't know you were there. My question, I've got 3 questions. First one is at the end of paragraph 6, we talk about the new corporate parenting board arrangements. And I suppose for me is, A, what are the key differences to the previous board, and how will it make it more effective? Because I think, you know, clear oversight of this is, we've talked about the fact that we've been dealing with 200 kids for a very, very long time. And then suddenly it jumped up to 270. It suggests a lack of oversight in the past. And I just wondered if this will help. My second question is about paragraph 9, where we talk about recruitment of social care. Recruitment campaign was launched in December and a rolling advert is in place. Could you let me know if that's bore any fruit, if that's been positive? And my final question, hopefully for Richard, is on the page 27, paragraph 21. Communities and equalities. These services are expected to outturn within budget. There are a number of minor variations. Surely that's not right. That can't be. We're not going to make up 7 million quid out of this particular budget, or is that taking into account the sudden rush of DFE money. It's just, yeah, what's going on there?
So do you want to deal with the money thing first, Richard?
Go
and
for
then
it, Richard, yeah.
Shall I deal with that one first? So I think it's probably just the way that's just talking about the specific budgets within the communities and qualities area that are under the responsibility of this committee. So within those budgets, we've got some minor variations. We're expecting those to come in on budget. But what we're looking for is if between when this report, this is obviously talking about quarter 3, which was information at the end of December, that there would be an expectation that all services across the council would be looking at reining in expenditure between then and the end of the year to help with the overall position. We're not expecting that to deal with the 7 million. It's just any contribution towards that will be gratefully received, I think is the way I would turn it.
Thanks, Richard. Shall I deal with the outcome of the recruitment campaign first? Because I think the corporate parenting might helpfully kind of roll into our paper on children and care. So we're really pleased with the initial output from the recruitment campaign, and about to do phase 2 of that alongside our adult care colleagues too. The recruitment campaign we launched it just before Christmas, and we ran it over the Christmas period. It was aimed at social workers and managers, and we've been able to, and our independent reviewing officers. We have a rolling social work advert, and we have a rota in place for our managers to be able to interview and shortlist and do all of that thing, so we keep it kind of neat and we don't lose anybody. We've had approximately 5 practitioners recruited, some en route, some already in. And we have 3 operational managers and 2 IROs, independent reviewing officers, out of that. One of those independent reviewing officers has been a transfer over from our quality assurance unit into an operational manager's job, which is great because it means that we've managed to keep her in York with all of that experience that she has and understanding the city and the children's needs. But like I say, you know, we are always fishing in a national small pool, and we've got a really good video going out, a good kind of recruitment professional clip going out as part of our next phase 2 of our recruitment campaign, due to be out in the next couple of weeks. I think that's right, Jamila, isn't it? We're doing it alongside our adult colleagues too. One of the reasons why I think it's helpful to have also attracted some managers is that, you know, I've been in this business for 30 odd years, and good people attract good people. So attracting a manager often attracts other practitioners. But part of our workforce development strategy is about a real kind of investment in a student population where we breed our own practitioners into brilliance, and they become our ASYE, our newly qualified cohort, and hopefully our future managers, where we have a much more longer term resilient workforce development strategy. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Obviously, I feel for you at times, really, because finding social workers seems to be the question I keep asking, and the one that's the hardest to answer. Do you want to talk about corporate parenting now, or do you want to leave that to another item? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think it's probably wise. We've got Neil in the room with you and Julie on screen, and they can present their paper. Bob, I just add to my part about the social work recruitment. You know, the national directors of children's services believe that there needs to be a kind of government-sponsored recruitment drive of social workers in the way that there has been previously for, you know, education and for health colleagues. But we, you know, that's a very live debate in the national directors for children's services and across adult directors too. So we keep pushing that. And for now, we are very, very conscious that, you know, authorities are robbing Peter to pay Paul. One of the things that we've done as a region is to have a kind of cap on our agency rates that we're paying, so that, you know, for our children regionally, they're experiencing as much stability, and that staff aren't moving because actually one authority is paying significantly more than another. So York is, you know, it's an equal competitor in salary wise for practitioners across the region. And one of the things we know attracts social workers is manageable caseloads, good quality supervision, the right kind of conditions in which you get to make a difference in a child's life. And our professional recruitment campaign has a really lovely, we should show it to you really, it has a really lovely warm expression of practitioners at the front face of that, really talking about what it's like to work in York, really. So we're quite hopeful. Those are the things, because we know we've got some good conditions with the right kind of plug that that will certainly be in a better position than we are at the moment.
Thank you, Anne.
Anyone else? Any other questions from Councillor Heaton?
Just to go back to the question that I was going to ask earlier, it follows on quite nicely actually. Talking about these recruitment drives for social workers, what's been the net movement of social workers over the last couple of years?
Oh, you'll forgive me, I don't have the actual figure in front of me. Maybe it missed me to not have that as I come into scrutiny, but it's certainly something that we'll follow up with you, and I can let you know once I've gone and done my figures. I don't want to lead you up the garden path. But Neil, I wonder if you have, you've got that kind of idea to hand.
Do we know if it's about the same, or if it's gone up, it's gone down? It's just we're talking about vacancies and, you know, the cost that puts upon us. So it's interesting to know what the retention is.
Yes, I mean, you know, one of the things that has happened in the last 12 months is that we've invested in our restructured, delivered additional posts across the service, and that can make us look like our vacancy factor is bigger, but actually it's because we've invested in our service, and that means that we've had to bring in some additional agency staff in order to cover those whilst we do our recruitment campaign. I'm just sorry I haven't got the numbers in front of me right here, right now, but I can see Neil running to the screen.
Yeah.
Thanks, colleagues. You clearly couldn't wait to hear from me. So there is a DfE workforce return which happens in November of each year. So I've just opened our submission from last November. So we had 40.5 FTE starters in the year preceding last November 2021. And the number of leavers over that time period were 18.5 FTE. So that's a turnover rate of 18%. So you can see reflected in those figures the turnover, but also some of that growth that Anne mentioned in terms of actually that is a net increase as well. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks. Do we have any sort of like feedback from exit interviews on, you know, why people are moving on, or, you know, it'd be useful to know if we have any sort of like push factors involved there as well. I understand that one might be delving a bit further into the hard drive there, but
no, I think that's an okay question. I think that we've had a whole range. It's something that we're quite keen to keep a track on, and in fact it's one of the reasons for our workforce development board now starting to take grip. We had a range of feedback. We've had some people move on recently for promotion, and obviously in an organisation like York that's quite compact, the kind of the level of management is flatter than it is elsewhere. So we've certainly lost only a couple of people to promotion. One of our most recent exit interviews was actually because one of our practitioners was her husband had got a job elsewhere, and so she was moving for family reasons. We've moved some of our agency workers on who we felt were not working to the level and skill that we needed them to deliver for our children. But we haven't got a proportion of staff who've left because of you know, being unhappy with the conditions and the work and the working environment in York. I just reiterate to you, caseloads in York are good. They are competitive within the region. So we don't have practitioners moving for those kind of negative reasons.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Any other questions for this item? Right. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, Richard. Anne and Maxine on Zoom, thank you both. And I think this is a good time to call an adjournment for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and start on item 6, the children and young people in care. Thank you all. Thank you all. Welcome back. We now come to item 6 on the agenda, children and young people in care, covered by Neil, Julie and Anne. Neil, do you want to start since you're with us?
Yes, so by virtue of being in the room, I'm going to sort of take you through just a summary of what's covered in the paper and then give time obviously for discussion and questions. So we've already touched on some of this during the financial report. The report updates the Committee on Children and Young People in Care. So this is where children have come into care and we take on corporate parent responsibilities. And as it's outlined in the paper, and as I'm sure you would all agree, this is one of the most significant roles that the local authority can play. The paper does include some details about the profile of children and people in care and how that has changed over time. So on page 32 of the pack, just ahead of paragraph 5, you can see how that population has changed, reflecting the earlier conversation. I will just draw your attention to paragraph 5, which also provides some of the comparison rates. That's where it's number of children in care per 10,000. So actually, regionally, we're below the regional average, and we know that we're fairly middle of the pack when you rank the authorities in the region. We are higher though compared to national and statistical comparators. That information is always on a year lag because of when it's published. Critically, we've reflected within the paper as well some key messages which have come to us from children and young people. So the messages contained in the paper come from a biannual survey done with children and young people in care or care leavers called You Matter, and that links more closely to our corporate parenting board as well, which was also something picked up on in the last agenda. And I think what I'd be playing back to colleagues in terms of what we are looking to do in terms of our corporate parenting board, but particularly around our voices. I think we have some very good voice arrangements. I think our advocacy service is quite strong and effective. I think we have a ready and able pool of young people through Show Me That I Matter, I Still Matter, and other voice routes that are only too keen to tell us their views and their experiences. What we need to make sure that we're fully doing as a corporate parent is really closing that loop about acting on the messages that they're sharing with us, and that we're demonstrating and giving them confidence in the actions we're taking as a result of working with them. It is reflected within the report that we are revising the corporate parenting board arrangements. That is something which has happened now, and that we have in place corporate parenting advisors. So these are people that have been recruited specifically, that they have the skills and the experience necessary to be able to represent this very particular group of children and young people. We've had a number of meetings with them already, and actually they're already demonstrating huge value for us in strengthening the connectivity between children's voice and how that actually makes a difference, but there is still further to go. We talked about placement sufficiency under finance. Obviously, that is here as well, talking about the sufficiency of placements. The report also picks up about the annual dental and health assessments that children and young people in care should have available. We also talk about the virtual school within the paper, so you have details within there around the attendance, the attainment of our children and people in care. And we also, of course, talk about care leavers. The phrase often used around corporate parenting is, what would you do if it was your own children? Well, once they get to 18, they still remain part of your family. So actually care leavers is something that we care deeply about, and is a continuing area of focus. And finally, we finished the paper with a number of just key bullet points really about these are areas of priority for us as we see them in the corporate parenting arena. So rather than me spend too long going through each and every aspect of this, it's probably best if I just draw a line there and seek any questions and comments from colleagues.
Thank you very much, Neil. Can I start the questions rolling this time? In terms of care leavers and transitions, I just wonder why York at 16% is twice the national average. I'm sure there are very good reasons why we support young people after 18. Why are we so different from other parts of the country? what are they not doing, which we are doing? It's a question that we're doing. Are we leading the pack, in other words, in terms of good practice and good parenting?
I think I'll let my colleague Julie Mepham probably come in on that one. So you're referring to our staying put rates.
Yes.
Is that right? Yes, that's right. Julie, are you happy to speak to that?
Yeah, I can pick that up. So we are, in fact, leading the pack. We do very well in York that a high number of our children stay at home with their families, which is really positive because, you know, if you look at your own families, if you look at the families around you in the community, most young people don't leave home till well past the age of 25 these days. So the fact that our young people stay at home with their foster families, who they see as their family, is really positive. So in terms of what we do in York, we are absolutely leading the pack. We'd like more of our young people to stay at home than move on into the community too early, and then have to come home, because invariably when a young person moves out of a foster family, once they've gone, then we place another child with that foster family. So it's not as easy to return home to a foster family as it is to a birth family.
Thank you, Julia. It's good to hear that York is leading the way, that others hopefully will follow, and that we are setting best practice, if you like. Thank you very much. And Councillor Fitzpatrick.
I just want to add here, really comment more than anything else, and I would like to say how impressive the new arrangement for corporate parenting is in terms of the young people that are there and the young people leading the meeting. Julie will know how successful that was last time in particular, and Neil. It is good to see them, you know, there taking charge. We constitutionally have to be sure, though, that us adults within the council are clear about AGM time, that we're clear that we're coming off that properly officially, so we know we're not on committees, etc. But that aside, the actual structure of it is very, very good. And it was very interesting, the meeting before last, that young people identified housing, didn't they, Neil, as an issue and concern, that they were not happy with the flats that they were allocated, the not temporary, what are they? Interim, is it interim? Or
the trainer flats.
Training, yeah, that's the word. So anyway, I just want to say thank you to Julie and to Anne, really, and to Neil for the changes that have been made in corporate parenting. I think they're really going to be good. What we do need to be sure of, though, is that there is the opportunity there to scrutinise, so that we know that we can be happy that things are going as well as they can be. But the structure of them and seeing the confidence of the young people chairing and running the meetings, really good. So well done, all concerned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just the paragraph 7A, bottom of page 32, top of page 33. It's reference to a dip in the numbers of young people in care who state they would talk to their carers or social workers if they were feeling unhappy about where they were living, and that the response does seem to have dipped quite significantly. I just wondered whether is that one of the areas where the new advisors that you mentioned, is that part of their focus in terms of where young people, you know, for whatever reason, don't feel able to talk to their social worker or carer where they are perhaps feeling unhappy? Will the advisors play a role in not taking the place of the carer or the social worker, but maybe working with the young person and also with the carer and providing advice to them? So perhaps the young person is you know, is more likely to feel able to raise, you know, concerns about the living arrangements or any other aspect of their care. But I was wondering whether that was one of the things that the advisors would be looking to address.
Shall I pick that one up, Neil? Or
Yeah, I was going to be happy if you want to, Julie. Yeah.
So the role of the advisors is not to work with individual young people. It is to be available and to be in the meetings where the young people are, so their voice can be heard. In terms of supporting our young children, young people who don't feel able to speak to their foster carer or to their social worker, we have an advocacy service, and all our young people can access an advocate So they have an external person who can support them with any of the issues that they might feel they need to raise and can't actually say those words out loud to the person that's closest to them, as in their foster carer or their social worker. But directly involved, no, the corporate parenting advisors won't be directly involved with individual work with young people.
Julie, I'll just come in on the back of you on that in terms of, you know, I think you hear a statement like that, and I think we all get a bit exercised and a bit worried about that, because that's exactly, you know, we want children to feel the opposite. 30 years in this business, it amazes me that children never manage to talk to any adult at times, really. And what we know we have to always do is to really upskill our practitioners to be able to notice some of those signs that happen for children, and upskill our carers and indeed our trusted colleagues in education, where we want our children and young people to spend a lot of their time. So I think it's a really, you know, it's a stark issue that jumps out at this report, and I think it's, you know, something that we all have to work really relentlessly on. We have currently, through all of April, a whole range of what we've called action learning sets in terms of improving practice and making sure that all of our practitioners and managers can be their best self for children, whether we're talking about children in care or on a child protection plan or subject to need. And one of the things for York we have to think about creatively is that, given we're so compact, you know, sending our colleagues off on a range of different courses that take days out actually sometimes means that we don't manage to do that. So we've taken a bit more of a more mobile and agile approach to that. So we take bite-sized chunk learning into the teams. We've got 12 of those being delivered over the course of April, with a plan for May and June. But it is, you know, always about communication, observation, and just that real skill to sit with young people and be your humble self, so that young people feel safe enough to be able to talk to you. And it goes hand in hand with all the other developments that we're doing, of course.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Thank you. On paragraph 6, where we talk about placements with parents, this equating to 16.9% of the population of children and young people in care. And then it goes on to say that comparative data is not available for this cohort. Is that because other places don't record that or do something slightly differently? So yeah, anything you could talk around that would be really helpful, whoever's best placed for that one. And then while I've got the floor, just another couple of questions on paragraph 27. We talk about young people in education, employment or training, or not, as the case may be. It was saying that actually we're doing pretty well, but then performance has recently dipped due to changes within the team. You know, what is it that's changed about the team that's led to those changes in performance? And then finally, my third question on paragraph 33, regarding foster carer recruitment. The last paragraph, we know we need to do more to ensure we attract more carers and more of the right carers to meet the needs of our children. I found that language just slightly challenging, really. And I was wondering, is there a reason, you know, what do we mean when we say the right carers? And what, you know, we've talked about the issues around foster care and recruitment for a while now. So it's just something I'd like to explore. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. So shall I deal with the placement with parents, and then Julie, I'll hand to you to think about the right carers, and then we'll think about who's best to answer the education, employment, and training. Is that okay? Does that sound fine? Yeah. So I mean, you'll know that I've spoken before at Scrutiny about the profile of our children in terms of care and our court scenario. to answer your question, Bob, is this a figure that's collected and is it a comparable data set across the country? Well, no, it doesn't. It's not a DFE return. We don't tend to do a comparative statistical or regional a report about placement with parents. There was a report produced before Christmas by the Family Justice Council, I think it was. I'll find the reference if you're interested, and because it was about nationally and what's happening in the courts. And actually the Yorkshire and Humber does have a higher proportion of placement with parent children than I've seen across the rest of the country. But we do seem to have a higher number than our regional colleagues. And I think some of that is about us being a little bit, it's about how we'll improve our practice in final care plans at courts. It's about us, really building up a trusting relationship with the court structure, and actually about, doing lots of work as a partnership around understanding safe uncertainty, because that's the area that we're in children's social care, around safe uncertainty, and that children, if they are with their parents, they should be with their parents under their responsibility. We're doing lots of work around that operationally. And in fact, we have about 28 of those children over the next 3 to 6 months that will be presented back to court in order to step down from placement with parents and leave them independently with their parents, but supported through a child in need plan, because that's proportionate to those children's needs. Does that make sense?
Just about. Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, no worries. Julie, do you want to pick up the language around fostering?
Yeah, I think maybe we should have read that back to ourselves before we wrote it. It's not that we have the wrong carers currently. We absolutely have the right carers currently. It's about carers who can provide the level of care, love, affection, etc., that our children need, and understand the needs of our children. Not lots, unfortunately. People often approach to be foster carers when they don't fully understand the role or what it means or how long it will last. It can be a lifetime of a child. And so when we get approaches, then we need to make sure that the right people, to use that terminology, are coming through to be assessed as foster carers, to go to panel, to look after our children. What we don't want are people who come, don't fully understand the role, a child goes to live with them, and then all our children come to us because in some way or other they've lived through trauma. And if we've not got the right people and done the right training with them, then people leave really quickly the fostering service, and that's not what we want to happen for our children. We want consistent families. We want families who will be there through thick and thin for our children, and who will garner the support that we offer them and offer that support and care then to our children. So excuse the language, we will look at that as we move forward.
Julie, I was just thinking, and coming on the back of that, how interesting it is in that, given that we are doing really well in terms of our staying put arrangements for children, we have some incredible foster carers in York. And actually we were talking about, that kind of breeding ground to make sure that's what everyone understands, really.
Yeah, I think, to be a foster care is a fantastic challenge, and I thank all of our foster carers who are out there. I think it's brilliant. I just think with a recruitment campaign, we do need to tell people the facts so that we can sort of expand that practice. And I just thought it was something that needed spotting. Have you decided who gets to answer the education, employment and training question?
I think that one's me. So we have an education, training and employment worker in our pathway team. Unfortunately, she has been off work for over 6 months. And so the personal advisors within the team have been doing the work around education, training and employment alongside everything else that they do with their young people. So accommodation, emotional issues, parenting issues, etc., life basically in general. So the work around, working with our ET providers, training providers, with the colleges, with the schools, has slipped slightly because we've not had that dedicated role in the service. that person is now back at work, and so is absolutely picking up the reins, is picking up the work with all our young people and with the PAs and with external partners. So by the next time we come with a report on our young people in education, training or employment, that figure will have lifted back again to where we would want it to be in terms of our young people being engaged.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Any further questions from committee members?
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick one on the on foster carers. Point 30. It's obviously talking there about placement sufficiency for teenagers continue to be an ongoing challenge, which I would assume is something that goes on nationally as well. What's the status of placements for multiple children, those are family groups?
I take that one. So again, with the two areas where we need to do some rapid recruitment, and we need to be, again, as I've said, working with potential foster carers, and again with some of our current foster carers who may only have got single children with them, is that work around. We need parents, foster parents, who can offer homes to sibling groups and to older teenagers. That's where our recruitment campaign will be dedicated over the coming months. It's Fostering Fortnight at the beginning of May towards the end of May, so it's 9th to the 22nd. We're currently working with our comms team. We have met with YAFCA, our Foster Care Association. So the comms team, YAFCA, other foster carers and our corporate parenting advisors are all going to be involved in a recruitment campaign. And that will be mainly, as I've said, directed at recruiting. We need foster carers of all kinds, but foster carers who will look to opening their homes to our older teenagers and sibling groups, because clearly we want to keep sibling groups together.
Julie, thank you for mentioning Fostering Fortnight. And I think we just want to give you a bit of a plug also as Scrutiny about looking for your help and support around the promotion of Fostering Fortnight. It is our intention to be out and be loud and proud across the city about that, and really reaching into all of our kind of education establishments and businesses really to really push our requirements around fostering, because we know that when we do this stuff well, and certainly Julie and I have experience of doing that elsewhere really well, there's some untapped brilliant people around who just may not have heard about the real value of fostering, not only for a child but actually what that gives you as an adult. It's incredible. I take my hat off to every foster carer, really. It's not something I could do myself. That's why I'm a director of children's services, but they are incredible people who really do make a difference in children's lives for generations to come. So we'll be looking for your help and support around Fostering Fortnight too, if that's okay.
Part of what we are looking to do is, I did a piece of work with another local authority not too long ago, and one of the things they did, both in their corporate parenting board and in their fostering campaign, was talk about proud moments as parents. And I think that's great. So some of the proud moments were a young person had gone to university, or a young person had got a job or moved into their own home, or numerous things. One of them was about children in a children's home that they'd been asking for a new bathroom for a very long time, and they'd had a new bathroom put in, and they'd had an opening ceremony and invited the director to come and open their bathroom. And for them, that was a hugely proud moment, because they'd planned it and they'd planned the tiles and what was going on the floor, etc. So as part of our campaign, we were talking about the proud moments that we have with our foster children across York, because it's really important that families out there see children who are in care as they would see any other child, and not that they are different.
Thanks, Julie.
I have one question for the team. I noted that you were keen to recognise the important dates in a young person's life. Obviously, birthdays would be one, and I'm sure there have been many others. For example, winning a school prize or coming first in a certain race and so on. Can you tell me how you go about recognising those important dates that we know every child should have recognition for? Let us say, winning a 100-metre swimming race or something like that.
So their social workers and their personal advisors would be and their foster carers clearly would be the people that celebrate those achievements, that make us in senior management aware of those achievements. So for instance, we have a young woman who lives in a residential home in York, and it was her 16th birthday on a weekend, a couple of weekends ago, and a team manager and both her social workers went out and did afternoon tea with her. They put balloons up in the house. They sent cards. I sent a birthday card through the post. So we do recognise those things. A young man recently passed out at, I think that's what they call it when you finish your training at the army, and not as in literally passed out. The social worker and the foster carers, when we then as corporate parents paid for the foster carers to take him out for a really lovely meal that evening. So we try and celebrate where we can. When we know something's happening, GCSEs, driving lessons, etc., we try and tailor that celebration, big or small, to that individual child.
That's great. That's very encouraging indeed. Thank you very much. Any other questions from colleagues? No. Okay, well, thank you all for the report and for your time this evening. And we'll look forward to the next update in a few committees' time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Right, we'll now move on to item 7 on the agenda, the scrutiny review into the school holiday food. I think I'll lead on this one, and Councillor Fitzpatrick and Councillor Fenton can join in. This is one where the executive has asked us to look at the fairly abrupt ending of funding from central government, and the council have also put funding in to provide vouchers for those youngsters who receive free school meals during term time, how to help provide the cost of food during holiday time. Now, before that pandemic, there was no support at all. And the government recognised this support was necessary during the pandemic and began funding, and that's kind of gone on, but it's come to an end in February of this year. There has been provision made over Easter, I understand, but of course that kind of funding at the council expense cannot continue forever. So we are looking at possible alternatives and how that might be funded going forward, because clearly we'll all be aware that there's a great deal of pressure on the household budgets now, and the further you are down the income scale, the more those pressures will be felt. I'm obviously thinking about inflation, I'm thinking about the cost of energy, I'm thinking about the cost of fuel. Inflation today, I think, is 7%, and it's projected to rise further. So it's important work. We have gathered information, and thank you very much to Pauline Stutchfield, who's sitting beside me, and our teams for the provision of data that we've all considered. I know we have some still to come, and we are beginning to analyse data and to write the report, which will eventually go to executive. It will come back to this committee on the 3rd of May. And I think by then we will have virtually all complete. But because of some of the processes it has to go through in terms of possibly going to the two portfolio holders of this particular holiday hunger issue, it may be they're still marked interim before it on May the 3rd, but it should be by that point virtually complete. But of course, because of the committee cycle, papers, requirement dates and so on, we do have to get these things in fairly quickly, sometime before the committee actually sits. So bear with us on that. Anything that Fiona would like to say?
Well, I'd like to say really that the amount of work that both Councillor Daubney and Fenton have done far outstrips what I've done as yet, because the bit that I'm responsible for. And Maxine, if Maxine is here, really big thanks to Maxine for giving me the contacts with schools. It's just been a slight delay really, because first of all, we were going through an inspection in the authority, obviously. So Maxine's time, I didn't want to bother people who were otherwise engaged. So now, of course, it's school holidays, but if I can, we are hopeful to get that information immediately at the end of the school holiday. And of course, the business managers in schools, a lot of them are there anyway in the holidays as well. Yeah. So they're the ones that Maxine has directed me to, apart from Archbishop Holgate, and the head teacher wants to have responsibility for that and talk to me about that. So yeah, I'm making some progress, but yeah, I'm hoping that I can meet the deadline is what I'm saying. Basically,
not to worry. It's a complex area and there's a great deal of material to consider.
But in a sense, you know, we've got vouchers for Easter. So that additional bit of information will be useful. When we started this, we weren't absolutely sure about that, were we?
Indeed.
So yeah, and we're hoping also, well, I'm hoping when I speak to the schools to get some information about parents' views about it as well. We thought we wanted to try and get that, didn't we?
We did.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, very much.
But
so.
anyway, we have worked quite hard. And Pauline, it's been great for the information that you've given us. Jane, you know, forwarding on things to us and things like that. So yeah, we're trying to work as hard as we can, and we've met quite a few times, haven't we? Really?
Yeah, we've met 3 times now. The last meeting, I think, got some extra notes on there. Was the 11th of April.
Yeah, last Friday.
And we met both the portfolio holders and the executive on the 8th of April.
Yes, we wanted to meet the 2 portfolio holders because we wanted to be clear about what their roles were, really. Because I personally didn't quite understand how they would operate in that way. So it was illuminating, wasn't it?
Useful. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it from me.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fenton, anything you'd like to add?
Not really. I think we're doing the best we can within the time, and sometimes you can be easily outfaced by the potential amount of information you know is out there and would really like to gather and understand, so we can come up with the best set of recommendations that we can. But that's never a possibility. So we have to be realistic about what we can achieve, and it's just going back to understanding what it was we were asked to do and what the outcome is. And the outcome I think we're looking for is a sustainable approach that means the people who need support are able to get it, and that's
indeed,
you know, we can and probably will produce reams and reams of lots of really interesting information, which is useful in itself, but it does need to kind of lead us somewhere in terms of a recommendation. I think that's I'm confident we're heading in the right direction.
Good, thank you very much. By all means.
Because obviously we're moving towards the summer now, aren't we, really? So we hope that anything we might be able to produce and suggest will move us in a direction to be able to help in the summer holidays, really.
Quite so. Right, thank you all. Any questions from the committee?
Yeah, Chair, could I just ask a question, really? Firstly, I think from my point of view, I think that we spoke at a previous committee meeting about the holiday activity and food programme and how that really hadn't gone that well. Now, that wasn't necessarily down to officers. They'd put a lot of effort into it, but it was very, very rushed because it had just been announced. And also it was just this view of you've got to sing for your supper, quite frankly, which is so Victorian in its approach. Just seems, it's uneasy with me. But and then the alternative, the just giving people the vouchers actually work quite well. But of course, is that sustainable is the big question on a local authority basis. And you look at the numbers on page 50, 800 plus increase in the number of children. I mean, that is like an entire secondary school all by itself, isn't it? And I think we just need to work at this really hard. I think we need to look at the options, but I think really we do need to be very mindful that we're not I think the activities programme, unless it's reformed, unless things are added to it, unless it's changed, it was clear it wasn't supporting particularly older teenagers. There was large groups of people who weren't getting anything, particularly over Christmas, when we think about the way energy prices are going, this coming Christmas is going to be a hard one. So it's just my thoughts. And one other thing, I've been speaking to the area manager for the Trussell Trust, who they've got a project running in Leeds, where essentially what they do is if someone attends a food bank in requirement of food, there'll be an interview process with this person and sort of a discussion of, well, why is it that you need food? Because it's inevitably because you haven't got enough money. So why haven't you got the money? And they've devised a scheme which has been running from October through to April as a pilot. And hopefully by June, which is not ideal for your timescale, I know, but it's something I think we should potentially consider looking at after that. They'll have the results of this pilot. And what they're doing is looking at a program of you get the cash first as a family, as an adult. You could walk in and they would essentially give you a blank debit card. They'd agree a certain amount of money that will tide you over. And you'll be able to pick up that money from an ATM the next morning. Therefore, really giving back dignity to a lot of people and avoiding a lot of the issues with food banks that it might not be appropriate what's there, or it becomes quite difficult, or it relies on there being food there in the first place. And I just think it's something that as a council, Leeds have taken some of the sort of financial assistance money and directly put it into this project. And I thought it was quite a neat and clever way of doing things. And this conversation came off the back of the right to food motion that I presented to council before Christmas. And I thought that was something that was quite useful, quite interesting. And I just thought I'd feed it in here as something that you might want to consider. And I've got the contact details for the area manager if it was someone you want to speak to, and she was more than happy to get involved. But while we were talking about it, I thought I'd mention it. Thank you.
Councillor Fitzpatrick.
I don't want to keep us too long. I know we're near the end of a long evening. I just wanted to say that one of the difficulties we also discussed, the three of us, about the first type of idea, the HAP idea, was the fact that a hot meal had to be produced, didn't it, really? And the price of that hot meal, the cost of it, the people organising the activities. If the school kitchen was closed, there was no way they could, provide it for that small amount of money, really, in a sense. So it was the working around a hot meal type thing that presented a bit of a problem too. Although obviously the idea behind that's good, to give a child a hot meal. It's the practicalities of doing that, really. With all the hoops you have to jump through to use kitchens these days. People running schemes have to be qualified up to a certain standard to be able to do that. It seemed to be much easier just to give someone a pack of sandwiches or something, which was not really the intention. Am I right on that, Stephen? Thank you.
Right. Any other comments on the stage? Don't have anything, Pauline?
Always. Thank you, Chair. Just to say a few things about some of the additional support that we're putting in place this Easter. We've talked about the 1 week's voucher. We've talked about the HAS scheme. We also ran a challenge poverty Talk Money month in November, and we've reissued all of that support information and advice to parents through schools as well, and we're rerunning that whole campaign at the end of the Easter holidays, running into the spring and the summer. One of the things that we've been able to plan for, and we'll be talking to executive members about, is that in the same way as we've been able to run a fuel voucher scheme for the first time in the last few months, where all of our advice partners across the city in the voluntary charity sector, as well as the council and local area coordinators, have access to that scheme. We can run food vouchers through that as well. And as you will know, the executive approved £100,000 for holiday home, of which almost 2/3 of that will go into the voucher, preschool meal vouchers for the holidays this time, but the balance could go into that scheme. And what that means is that it will go to people where the need is. Debt advisors or citizens advice or local area coordinators or people at Peace Home can identify where the need is and then access those vouchers on an immediate basis. So that's an idea, and of course that there's further funding that's been identified in the budget to support. And equally, we can use other funds, York Financial Assistance Scheme. There are funds there to be used in different ways. And that's always available as well. And we can issue food vouchers through the York Financial Assistance Scheme. And just strategically, the Financial Inclusion Steering Group, which is a partnership group, is looking at its strategy. And the council is supporting the Poverty Truth Commission. We expect them to very much focus on some of the subject areas that we've talked about as well, particularly around cost of living, fuel and food, and also some of the items that we discussed earlier around digital inclusion, which often gets you access to some of that support as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Right. I think the next item on the agenda is the work plan. It's not very much on it now because we're getting towards the end of the municipal year. Our next committee is going to be the 3rd of May. And obviously, the reports had to be with Jane fairly soon. We've just been talking about the school holiday food task group, which is something I should be get busy with over the holiday, as I'm sure my colleagues will as well. I know the Children and Young People's Mental Health Task Group, the report is probably nearing completion in the capable hands of Councillor Webb. I do know he's completed the Community Hubs Task Group report, so it's all done. So I think we're making good progress towards these on all fronts, but I'm conscious that the date timeline is very tight for all of us, and certainly the first item, as we just remarked earlier, has a very broad range of material that could go in, but sometimes we have to be very selective and decide what is the really important items and issues that executive need to see. The next meeting will be the 17th of May, when we expect to have the autism strategy. I'm just conscious that that's the only item on the agenda. It's the joint commissioned slot with HASC. Are there any other items that would sit in that space that they might wish to consider with us? Or should we just leave it at the single item? Oh, I see. Right. Jenny's just told me that HASC are leading on this, so I'm sure they'll let us know if there's something else comes up. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Well, while I'm thanking people, I have to say, obviously, Councillor Webb here has done a fantastic amount of work in producing these other things and getting them together.
Indeed.
Really. So it's admirable. So well done, Bob.
I wouldn't be up too much yet, Fiona, if I'm honest. On the children and young people's mental health task group, to be clear, I mean, that's something that started as quite a narrow gauge focus thing before lockdown, and it's been going on and on and on. Well, it stopped and then it started again, and obviously with pandemic that had really changed the focus of it. And getting some of our health colleagues to stop speaking in acronyms and answer the question specifically, and then it would be really helpful. But I promise you, Jane, I'm getting really close now, and hopefully it'll be with you before the end of the week. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Right, I think that is all on the work plan in that case. I have no urgent business to continue with. So in that case, I shall declare the meeting closed at 19:40. Thank you all very much.